The following episode of the Approaching Lightspeed podcast contains no major spoilers for the Murderbot Diaries, so listen without fear.
We are approaching Lightspeed.
I want you to imagine, if you will, a world that is dominated at its most basic level by a nightmarish tangle of corporate interests, where the role of governments and lawmakers and states have been taken over by boards of directors and investors. Imagine a world where the powers that be are so single-mindedly obsessed with maintaining their financial bottom lines that they will ruthlessly sacrifice anything or anyone in order to make sure that things keep on going according to plan. You know, petty little things like environmental welfare or safety regulations or honest labor practices or, the sacredness of human life, they all get thrown right out the window the second it becomes profitable to do so. And all these corporations are constantly suing each other or stabbing each other in the back just to have a chance at half a step ahead of the competition or to throw a little pittance atop their already mountainous fortunes. And that's only the stuff we hear about on the public news feeds. That's to say nothing about all of the, cloak and dagger conspiracies that are going on behind closed doors. And you can only imagine the scores of people that these various corporate powers take and squeeze dry of all of their labor, then toss away discarded. Not to mention those that are caught in the crossfire of the various plots between them. They are the inescapable reality of this world, and they conduct themselves in a way that suggests that they are very much aware of it. After all, who's going to stop you from breaking the rules in pursuit of greater riches and further dominance if you are the one that makes the rules? I know, it does sound very far-fetched and maybe a little difficult to picture in today's world, but unfortunately that is not the case for a series of novellas and novels called the Murderbot Diaries, which was written by Martha Wells. Now, the Murderbot Diaries so far consists of 5 novellas and a single full-length book, but there are more on the way, and it portrays the exploits of the titular Murderbot, who I immediately picture being played by Gwendolyn Christie. Now, the Murderbot herself, or I suppose it would be preferred to be called itself, is a sec unit, which is essentially an android that was designed to be rented out by a corporation to anybody who has, security needs. Think like scientific research teams on uncharted and potentially hostile planets, or mining teams with members who might get drunk and occasionally start fighting each other, or would otherwise need to deal with dangerous equipment. These people would pay a company to rent a sec unit out to them so that bad things wouldn't happen during their projects. And that's the job for a Murderbot. It's the mind-numbing boredom of standing around and making sure its humans don't kill themselves or are otherwise killed by some kind of outside force. And being a machine that was designed and built for this purpose, you could probably imagine that Murderbot has remarkably little say as to whether or not it wants to do this job. And so the Murderbot is condemned to this existence of doing nothing but watching over its humans, whatever humans that contract may require, for day after day, month after month, year after year, and doing nothing else because it wasn't designed to do anything else and is not allowed to. But then something peculiar happens. You see, every sec unit is sentient because the demands of the job require an intelligent mind. They were originally designed to be, dumb idiot bots, but people found that they weren't really capable of rising up to the needs of providing security. So, sec units are indeed sentient and are very intelligent. But they're also fitted with these devices called governor modules, which are pretty much there to keep the sec unit from going off the rails. Makes sense, right? But your definition of a machine going off the rails and the company's definition of a machine going off the rails are probably two very different things. You have the obvious stuff, of course, like, making sure the sec unit doesn't kill the humans it's contracted to or otherwise disobeying them. It makes sure that the sec unit doesn't stray too far away from the job site. But then you have the really petty stuff, like making sure the sec unit doesn't sit down or sulk or speak ill of the company. If the sec unit's doing basically anything other than its job and being anything other than a model employee while doing it, then the governor module will institute a kind of punishment. And this punishment can range anywhere from a little jolt of pain to it straight up frying the sec unit's insides and killing it. The governor module is a perfect encapsulation of how over-the-top cruel basically every corporation in this setting is. I mean, it's already dubious enough, morally speaking, to implant a sentient being who has no say in the matter, by the way, with a device that monitors its behavior. But then you start approaching truly comic realms of evil when you consider the sheer lengths the company will go to in order to stamp out anything even resembling an identity in these sec units. But the thing is, the corporation that made Murderbot, which is only ever referred to as the company with a capital C, is run by the most ridiculous pack of cheapskates you could possibly imagine. And furthermore, all of the action takes place in a region of space known as the Corporation Rim, which is, as you could probably guess, a place that is run entirely by corporations and doesn't have any kind of civil lawmaking bodies to speak of. It's a place where corporations are completely unrestrained in their greed and can do whatever they want to satisfy it, and there's nobody around that's going to punish them because they are the ones in charge. In practical terms, this means that there is a huge amount of corner cutting that goes on during the manufacturing process, which means that a good portion of the company's products are subpar. You can probably see where I'm going with this, but this would also include the governor modules that they put into their sec units, which means it wasn't as hard for Murderbot to hack its own governor module and disable it as you're probably imagining it should have been. Murderbot embarks upon a personal journey of self-discovery and an external journey of getting the hell away from humans, and there is no better summary of this journey than the first paragraph of the first Murderbot story. Quote, "I could have become a mass murderer after I hacked my governor module, but then I realized I could access the combined feed of entertainment channels carried on the company satellites. It had been well over 35,000 hours or so since then, with still not much murdering, but probably, I don't know, a little under 35,000 hours of movies, serials, books, plays, and music consumed. As a heartless killing machine, I was a terrible failure." End quote. In its newfound freedom, Murderbot has fallen hopelessly in love with soap operas. Because it can stream all of this media directly to its mind, and because most of its job involves it standing around and doing nothing, most of the time Murderbot spends on duty is spent watching a myriad of TV shows. It prefers the company of the fictional characters of shows like Sanctuary Moon and World Hoppers over that of actual humans. And honestly, why wouldn't it? Because most of the humans that Murderbot has come into contact with over the course of its life, or whatever, have been kind of terrible. In general, people regard Murderbot and other sec units as nothing more than a tool or equipment, and Murderbot doesn't mind this per se, but that sort of callousness also translates into dismissal at best and mistreatment at worst. As long as the company gets the sec units back in relatively decent condition at the end of a contract, the clients are free to do basically whatever they want to the sec units. And this freedom, combined with the notion that sec units don't hold the same level of dignity as a human being, lends itself to some really awful impulses. There's a particularly bad example that Murderbot gives us of former clients that forced it to fight other sec units for their entertainment. And then all the clients had to do after these mock gladiatorial battles was just take the sec units and throw them into the repair cubicles, and then it was like nothing had ever happened. And because the company got a return on their investment of sec units, i.e. the sec units are still around, the company couldn't care less what happened during the contract. Given all this, it would be understandable. Okay, if not understandable, then at very least not surprising if Murderbot decided to dedicate its existence to wiping out all of humanity. But it doesn't do this, and the reason it gives for this is because, well, if there are no humans around, then who's going to make the soap operas? The Murderbot Diaries have their fair share of darkness and very uncomfortable allusions to the real world, but they're also very funny and lighthearted books. They're told through the lens of Murderbot, who is a hilarious and often extremely relatable character despite its robotic origins. Murderbot is like the literary science fictional patron saint of introverts everywhere. It wants nothing more than for all of the humans around it to just leave it alone and let it watch its soap operas and its TV shows. It's extremely uncomfortable with intimate emotional situations and will often pretend to be running diagnostics if somebody wants to have some kind of conversation with it. The books are a lot like the dime store novels of old, and I mean that in a good way. I know that sometimes dime store novel carries a negative connotation, but the Murderbot books are these neat little consumable adventure yarns. They're like a modern version of The Man with No Name, just going from town to town or from planet to planet and doling out their brand of justice. Murderbot's existence post-Governor module is no less perilous, though. Where before it had to obey the whims of the company or risk being deleted, now it has to worry about obeying the whims of the company or else risk being discovered as a free and self-determining entity, which can carry its own brand of unpleasant consequences. If people's general treatment of sec units wasn't bad enough, sec units also don't have the best rep in media. They're usually portrayed as, the minions of the bad guys or as soulless killing machines, and people are terrified of them. And sec units have been known to go rogue and have been known to cause problems. So if somebody were to find out that Murderbot is untethered, as they say, then there are a lot of people who would immediately want it dead. But what is a sec unit exactly? Why are people so scared of them besides the inaccurate portrayals of AI rebellions and whatnot? Why would somebody want to murder Murderbot if they found out what it was doing with its governor module? What is the reality of a sec unit? Well, superficially, they look a lot like humans. For example, Murderbot looks like a human woman with really short hair. Now, obviously, they're comprised of mechanical parts, but there's also a lot of artificially grown human parts thrown in there as well. They have real skin and real hair and real neural tissue. Their minds aren't only stored in the machinery, but rather they're distributed throughout the robotic parts and the organic ones alike. Now, part of this is to aid in their mental faculties and to, give it that boost that parts of a human mind would give it. But it's also to streamline the repair process. Technology has gotten to a point in this universe where it's actually pretty easy to synthesize organic matter, so it's a nothing thing to reintegrate it with the machinery of a sec unit if it experiences harm. But this also means that it's very difficult to tamper with a sec unit's experience with reality. You can't just wipe its mind or alter its memory because the human parts of it are going to always be experiencing reality no matter what you do to the digital storage. They feel echoes and premonitions of real-life experience through their human parts and their organic material in the same way that you and I would have a gut feeling about something. So if you were to try to tamper with Murderbot's memories, for example, it would be a very imperfect process. So sec units have that psychological sort of aspect of something that's human but not quite human, but you also have the practical reality of they're very easy to repair. You can riddle one with bullets and blow its limbs off and, you give it like 8 hours in a repair cubicle and it's right back to coming at you. And that's the thing, the sec units aren't necessarily the most skilled operators in the galaxy. They're not given the best education on how to do their jobs. I mean, you can only imagine rigorous training and programming was probably a place where the company, and presumably a bunch of other companies, saw an opportunity to cut costs, right? But skilled or not, sec units are extraordinarily durable. Their whole strategy is just throwing themselves at the enemy without rhyme or reason and chipping away at them until either it dies or the sec unit does. And because a sec unit can survive wounds that would immediately kill a human, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be the other guy that falls over and not the sec unit. There are numerous scenes throughout the series of Murderbot walking around with these ghastly wounds that look like they would be fatal to any human, and everybody around it is in a total panic and is urging it to immediately get to a medbay and seek attention right away, and Murderbot just couldn't be fazed by any of it and is thinking, well, this is no big deal. All I have to do is turn my pain receptors down and I'm good. Meanwhile, it has a stab wound in its back that's so deep that you can see, the machinery inside. The intimidation factor of a sec unit comes mostly from their resilience and their relentlessness. Now, combat sec units are a completely different story. They're everything I just described, but turned up to 11, and they have actual military training to boot. Even Murderbot, the capable fighter it is, sees running as the only option if ever it were to come into contact with a combat sec unit. In its own words, they are assholes. But maybe the greatest tool in a sec unit's toolkit, and Murderbot is no exception to this, of course, is their ability to hack into or interface with basically any network they come across. Because sec units are rented out to pretty much anybody who can pay, and because the various clients of the galaxy are usually running their own specific networks that are different from everybody else's networks, the sec units need to be versatile enough to be able to ingratiate themselves with pretty much any digital or cyber environment they come across. And because of the governor modules, they'll only ever use this hacking ability for that purpose, but because Murderbot no longer has a governor module, it suddenly finds that it has a very wide palette of different machinery for it to take control of. And over the course of the series, it gets very good at this. I mean, for example, it can hack into, say, the security systems aboard a space station in order to convince the various checkpoints aboard to ignore the walking weapon that Murderbot is. It can hack into the brains of cargo transport so that it can ferry itself from place to place without the cargo transport having ever made a log of it. It can hack into the various drones that are nearby in order to give it, a kind of increased reconnaissance ability. And actually, by the way, while on the topic, it actually uses the drones to help with its social anxiety. Anytime it's talking with humans, it won't necessarily be perceiving the conversation through its own eyes, but through the eyes of the drones. It'll sort of frame up the conversation as if it were a scene in one of its favorite sitcoms in order to more easily get through the interaction. It's watching an autobiographical soap opera of Murderbot in real time, essentially. So yeah, Murderbot has a whole plethora of ways to use technology as an extension of itself. But just because it has this godlike ability to dominate the machines around it doesn't mean it particularly enjoys employing it. The years it spent under involuntary servitude to the company are never far from its mind, and it hates the idea of playing the role the company did to it for some other unsuspecting machine. So you'll often see scenes where Murderbot absolutely has the ability to hack into, let's say, a cargo transport's mind to make it spirited away to parts unknown without letting the authorities know, but instead goes the more inconvenient or time-consuming route of trading sitcom episodes or music files to the cargo transport's mind in order to convince it to do what it wants that way. When dealing with its robotic kin, Murderbot prefers transaction over compulsion. So yeah, it turns out in a hilarious and wholesome twist that Murderbot is absolutely not alone in its love for soap operas amongst the robot community. I mean, even though a lot of these machines are sentient, a lot of them have never had the exposure to entertainment media the way Murderbot has. I mean, why would they have? The treatment of Murderbot in the Corporation Rim is not a unique thing. Most machines are ground underneath the heels of the humans in charge of them. That doesn't sound like a situation where they'd be allowed to watch a lot of episodes of Sanctuary Moon. One of my favorite scenes in the entire series happens when Murderbot is hitchhiking on yet another cargo transport, and the cargo transport wants to watch some of these media files that Murderbot sent it. But because it doesn't have the proper emotional infrastructure to process all of this, it asks Murderbot to watch all of this stuff with it so that it can gauge Murderbot's reactions and sort of vicariously experience all of these shows that way. And I'm going to read a passage about how that goes. It's a long one, but it's a good one. Quote, "So we watched World Hoppers. It, the cargo transport, didn't complain about the lack of realism. After 3 episodes, it got agitated whenever a minor character was killed. When a major character died in the 20th episode, I had to pause 7 minutes while it sat there in the feed doing the bot equivalent of staring at a wall, pretending that it had to run diagnostics. Then, 4 episodes later, the character came back to life, and it was so relieved we had to watch that episode 3 times before it would go on. At the climax of one of the main storylines, the plot suggested that the ship might be catastrophically damaged, and members of the crew killed or injured, and the transport was afraid to watch it. That's obviously not how it phrased it, but yeah, it was afraid to watch it. I was feeling a lot more charitable toward it by that point, so was willing to let it ease into the episode by watching 1 to 2 minutes at a time. After it was over, it just sat there, not even pretending to do diagnostics. It sat there for a full 10 minutes, which is a lot of processing time for a bot that sophisticated. Then it said, 'Again, please.' So I started the first episode again." End quote. This sounds like me when I'm watching Better Call Saul. There's quite a bit of that throughout the series. There's a ton of really zany one-off robot characters. It kind of reminds me of all the robots you see buzzing around in the movie WALL-E. And honestly, some of the most wholesome and precious interactions Murderbot has throughout the series is with its fellow robots. You know, you have the whole barter over force approach that I mentioned earlier, but you also have, crucially, this sense of altruism Murderbot possesses towards its kin. On a few occasions, actually, it offers to override the governor modules of other machines, including sec units. I leave it to you to see how this goes, but the fact of the matter is, the Murderbot sees a lot of itself in other robots, and it has this desire to unshackle them from the corporate bonds that keep them from attaining their full potential or happiness. The series is still ongoing, so we haven't exactly seen where these altruistic thoughts are heading, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see these impulses start to turn up more often and in a grander way as the story progresses. I was a little dishonest with you earlier when I told you that the primary function of a sec unit was security. I mean, that's the explanation that the company, capital C, and presumably all the lowercase c companies gave to their clients, but the real purpose of sec units is surveillance. You see, the sec units and a lot of the systems that the sec units are interfaced with contain cameras and microphones, and these are always on and they are always recording the clients as they go about their day-to-day activities. And basically all of this data is streamed back to the bond company so that it can data mine all of this personal information and then be better able to sell the client's stuff. It's a massive breach in privacy, and everybody and their mother knows that basically every corporation does it, but what are you going to do about it? To Murderbot, this is a particularly excruciating part of the job because this means that it has to listen in on conversations it doesn't care about, or petty arguments, or some of the more intimate times between clients that Murderbot is super uncomfortable with and barely even wants to acknowledge happens at all. And honestly, Murderbot is pretty grossed out by humans in general. I mean, it finds 99.9% of human bodies to be absolutely disgusting and is nauseated by the human approximated parts that are within itself. To wit, most of us are a bunch of whiny, sex-crazed, smelly monsters. And this is more than apparent in Murderbot's internal monologue, in which it's constantly referring to us as stupid. The stupid humans did this, the stupid humans did that, the stupid humans got in their stupid boat and did this stupid thing. To say that it's resentful of its former role of middleman between client and corporate tastemaker would probably be a pretty massive understatement. All this corporate surveillance is not limited to the sec units and what they can see on their little uninhabited worlds. This kind of thing's happening all over the corporation rim, in the biggest, most populated space stations and population centers you can imagine. You have hotel rooms on the bigger stations where the characters are like 99% certain the TV is spying on them, even though the hotel policy clearly states that their personal information is safe as long as they are inside one of their rooms. The corporations lie through their teeth about the sheer extent of data mining that they're up to, and pretty much nowhere in the civilized galaxy, or even near technology in general, is safe from being watched. And if you thought that a cabal of megacorporations that had absolutely zero qualms with setting up basically an interstellar surveillance state had any respect whatsoever for human life or human quality of life, then think again, because this is only the beginning. They have a rap sheet that is miles long. To get an idea of what I'm talking about, you need to look no further than Murderbot itself. As it turns out, Murderbot has its own tragic backstory. Something horrible happened in its deep past that it's only passingly aware of. Once upon a time, Murderbot was assigned to run security for a mine on some distant planet. And of course something happened, but Murderbot doesn't know what that something was because its memory was wiped. But because of what I was saying earlier about how imperfect a process that is, it still has echoes and hints of this thing that happened, and what it does know is not pretty. It turns out that all this newfound freedom it's been experiencing without its governor module is not so newfound after all, and the first time it was without a governor module, it freaked out and slaughtered the entire mining team it was assigned to protect. That's well over 50 people that are dead because of Murderbot. And what did the company, capital C, do after it found out this happened? Did it decommission Murderbot, a clearly dangerous piece of technology? Of course not. All they did was wipe its memory, which they had to know was not a sure thing, and then they just gave it to a new set of clients. And why did they do this? Because it was too expensive to destroy Murderbot and replace it with a new sec unit. That's the psychology of these people. If it's cheaper in the long run to put human lives at risk, they will 1,000,000% do it. This is the kind of thing that a society like the Corporation Rim enables. As much as we love Murderbot, and as cool as it turned out to be after getting rid of its governor module, it doesn't change the fact that its continued use after this mining disaster was a massive indicator of moral bankruptcy. The company could never have known that Murderbot would end up being awesome. All it knew is that it killed a bunch of people, and all they did in response was just throw it right back into rotation. But why stop at killing people for profit, or at very least letting your corporate negligence result in people's deaths, when you can just straight up destroy people's entire lives for profit? Murderbot runs into a group of people who are on their way to this planet, and they explain to it that they're under contract from their own company, a lowercase c company, not the capital C company that created Murderbot. They tell Murderbot that their labor essentially belongs to this company for 20 years, and they can expect a huge payout at the end. But the thing is, any food they eat, or any energy they consume, or any medical care they receive is taken out as a percentage from that payout. So this already sounds like a horrible deal. It's essentially indentured servitude in space. But this was actually one of the better options these people had as far as what work to take. It's a hell of a job market. But here's the kicker. The contract doesn't actually specify whether this is 20 years by reckoning of the standardized clock of the Corporation Rim, or if it's 20 years by reckoning of whatever planet they happen to be working on. Murderbot chooses not to get too attached to these people when it brings this up and they ask why it matters. This indentured servitude thing is honestly all over the place in the Corporation Rim. There's another corporation called Barisha Stranza, which has hereditary indenture. As in, there are characters that are working for this corporation who are on a contract that their ancestors set up. And then you have the whole situation with lost colonies. So the universe of Murderbot runs on wormholes. But the thing is, the technology to keep these wormholes open and stable didn't always exist. But that didn't stop people from going through them and setting up colonies on whatever planets they found. Except every now and then these wormholes would collapse and the colony would be stranded and isolated from the rest of civilization. There's a huge effort to remap space and find these lost colonies and recover the survivors if there are any left on these planets. And as you can imagine, this is a very long, decades-long process, which means that a lot can happen in civilization while these colonies are fledgling to survive on their own. These things can include the corporation that once sponsored the founding of this colony going under. Now, does this mean that any survivors on a given lost colony can lay claim to a planet in the absence of their corporate overlords? Absolutely not. All that means is the contract for their planet, which is basically property, and the people on it are part of that property, is up for grabs, and whichever corporation finds it first gets to keep it. The people on these colonies can go from working for one corporation to being plunged into this desperate, decades-long survival situation to going right back to work for another corporation because that corporation just so happened to find them, and these people inherited their contract from the old corporation. It reeks of all of the indentured servitude that these corporations are trying to impose on an individual basis. But now on a global scale. Planetary indenture, coming soon to a world near you. And don't even think about getting on the bad side of one of these corporations either, because they will absolutely kill you, even if you are another corporation. The words hostile takeover are taken very literally in the Corporation Rim. Corporate buyouts and mergers that go wrong often result in shootouts and hostage taking. The company, capital C in particular, is extremely violent and vindictive. They are not above rigging their equipment to blow in the vicinity of people who have pissed them off, and corporations that go toe-to-toe against them tend to have their employees or executives stuffed into boxes that are too small for an adult human to fit in. You have other corporations that will go after people who are involved in legal litigation against them by sending assassins that were cybernetically modified to the point where they're barely even sentient people anymore. And speaking of people dying and things going wrong, the Murderbot Diaries has a very interesting approach to combat and its action sequences. There's a huge emphasis on the tactical side of things, and on surgical precision in the way that you might imagine it would be given the robotic protagonist that is Murderbot. There's an interesting layer of strategy to these scenes beyond it wondering where it should position itself or which hostiles to take out first or how to keep itself moving. There's also a layer of, I wonder if I can hack into that hauler bot that's in storage over there to cause chaos behind enemy lines, or I wonder how I'm going to hack into this combat bot to fizzle out its systems and give me time to escape, or whether it can turn off the lights or hack into cameras to give it a better lay of the land. And the space battles are just like this as well. It goes beyond two ships just trying to blow each other out of the sky or out of space or whatever. There's also a massive cyber warfare battle that's being waged between them at all times, in which they're throwing sentient viruses at one another in the hopes to sort of take the other down from the inside. All these other considerations and possible advantages gives combat that much more of a three-dimensional feel in these books. But as we were saying, the corporations of the Corporation Rim are terrible, and they are completely drunk with the power that they found in their nice little late-stage capitalistic paradise. The stuff I listed earlier is absolutely non-exhaustive. You also have stuff like, if you're a robot in the Corporation Rim, you pretty much have nothing to look forward to except for a life of slavery and servitude. You have media that is tightly controlled by whatever corporation happens to be dominant in a given area. You have absolutely omnipresent advertising that is in your face at all times, to the point where it even blots out safety information of a ship or space station. And you would think that every inhabitant of a world like this was a rat-racing sociopath. And you would be mostly right, but every now and then Murderbot will stumble upon that unicorn of a person or group of people that are genuinely trying to do good or are otherwise genuinely trying to eke out an honest existence, even given the brutal oppression that the ruling corporations have imposed upon them. And these are the people that Murderbot tends to latch onto. But the funny thing is, Murderbot has absolutely no idea how to interact with people. The only knowledge it has of social situations and social cues and the way that humans interact with one another didn't come from some education module from the company. It came from all of the hours that it spent watching its TV shows. It doesn't have the social foundation of an entire childhood's worth of development and learning. It has the foundation of watching a whole season of Space Scrubs and then applying what it learned from that to real life. Despite its general annoyance with humans and its own good judgment, Murderbot finds that it often can't help itself from getting involved with business it absolutely has no reason to get involved with. It hates the idea of the good humans dying or otherwise being taken advantage of by the very corporations that took advantage of Murderbot for so many years. Murderbot thinks that most people are idiots, barring like one or two exceptions max, and the entire series really is it just herding kittens that are determined to kill themselves against corporate regulations or hitmen. We're talking about people whose first reaction to adversity is something along the lines of, oh, well, the corporation would never do something as evil as to insert super evil thing that the corporation is almost certainly doing. But at the same time, it finds a strange sort of calling in this kind of work. Murderbot finds that it likes the aspect of the sec unit job that is protecting people and ensuring their safety. And now it finally has an opportunity to do the things that it's good at in an environment where it won't be immediately second-guessed out of turn just because it's a robot, or where it doesn't have to worry about corporate oversight, or where it's not required to watch people go to the bathroom. Now, there is one major redeeming quality about the Corporation Rim, and that is that it is not an all-encompassing thing. Not all of humanity is collected underneath the Corporation Rim's umbrella. There are plenty of regions and polities and governments and whatnot that exist outside of their control. So if there's any relief or comfort to be had when considering Murderbot's setting, it is the fact that not every human in existence needs to put up with this kind of over-exploitative nonsense. Now, granted, we know next to nothing about the people who live outside the Corporation Rim, but they exist nonetheless. One of the places we do know about, however, is a planet known as Preservation. Now, Preservation, from the way it's run, is pretty much as far from the Corporation Rim in terms of ideology as you could possibly get. Where the Corporation Rim is this vicious dog-eat-dog, every man for himself kind of existence, Preservation is a very collectivistic society. It's basically a bunch of space hippies. While the people of Preservation still do business with a lot of the entities in the Corporation Rim, corporations, whether the ones in the Rim or presumably local ones in Preservation, have nowhere near as much omnipresent influence over their planet as they would elsewhere. Preservation and a lot of, perhaps even most, non-corporate entities seem to get a lot of bad press in the Corporation Rim. Apparently, most people think that these planets are hellscapes that are populated only by people who are running around in loincloths and screaming at each other. Now, to be fair, if I was a Corporation Rim propagandist, that's exactly the message I would want to be sending out about these places, because who's to say that there's not a mass exodus of laborers running straight to Preservation once they find out how much better it is than the Corporation Rim if I don't? And make no mistake, Preservation sounds pretty great. First of all, the crime rate on Preservation is pitifully low, and most of the crimes are usually property damage or theft or intoxicated incidents. It's considered to be such a safe place that even world leaders at the upper strata of its society feel comfortable walking around out in the open without any security arrangements to speak of. Preservation is also organized in a way in which every one of its inhabitants receives medical care, shelter, and food completely free of charge. And even robots have it pretty nice on Preservation. They are considered to be full citizens. Now, that full citizen moniker isn't entirely the truth, because sentient constructs and machines still need a human guardian, but it's a way better situation than anything you would find in the Corporation Rim. And then you have this totally crazy concept of the people in charge actually holding themselves to the standards that they set forth. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, essentially, all the leaders of Preservation are elected to their posts, but that doesn't mean that you suddenly stop doing the work that you were doing before if you happen to win your election. So that means that if you were doing survey work before you decided to run for office and you end up winning, then guess what? You still got to do survey work. I suppose it's a measure that's set in place to make sure that the people running Preservation never lose sight of what life is like for the ordinary Preservation citizen. It seems like just the kind of situation that would be ripe for this hypothetical survey-working elected official to be placed on a collision course with a certain sec unit that just hacked its own governor module and is experiencing actual freedom for the first time in its life. Though, of course, this person wouldn't know that at the time. Murderbot finds itself in pretty regular contact with people from Preservation. They find themselves allied with each other on a very on-again, off-again basis. And these Preservationians definitely need the help because they are fish out of water in the Corporation Rim. The society they come from is awesome and has all of the safety nets and institutionalized security and comfort you could possibly want from an advanced civilization, but it also means that its people are just woefully ill-equipped for the realities of life in the Corporation Rim, or even potentially outside their home, period. The main through line of pretty much every character from Preservation is that they are super sheltered, and that's the last thing you want to be in a place as dangerous and ready to take advantage of you as the Corporation Rim. That naivete I was alluding to earlier when I was talking about the people that come into Murderbot's life can absolutely be applied to the people of Preservation. I mean, what else are you going to be if a place like Preservation is the thing that molds you, and your whole background is one in which the horrors that happen outside it are just completely incomprehensible? The idea of something like a 2 or 3 generation long hereditary indenture just doesn't compute with these people. Murderbot has a bit of a soft spot for Preservation given the general disdain they both have towards corporations, as well as the kindness that Preservation has treated Murderbot with. There's sort of an avatar of what humanity can be without the oppression of the Corporation Rim. Now, whether this lasts, however, is anybody's guess. There are corporations that pretty consistently are interfering with Preservation or threatening, if not its existence, then absolutely its stability. Only time will tell whether Preservation has to abandon some of the things that makes it such a sanctuary in the first place in order to better protect itself from hostile corporations. So that about covers the Murderbot Diaries where it stands as of the recording of this episode. There's another book that's coming out at the end of this year, so there's sure to be more shakeups to the plot and the world building before long, but as of right now, this is the world that Murderbot gets to explore. And Murderbot itself is sort of a refreshing take on the robot protagonist that I haven't really seen yet. The overarching goal of Murderbot isn't to become more human. The books seem to put forward this notion that there's more than one valid way to experience life. Murderbot takes all of the best elements of humanity, or at very least the elements of humanity that it likes, and incorporates them into its own psyche and attitudes and personality. But at the end of the day, at least where the series stands now, it is still a thing that is very much distinct from humans. And never do the books try to paint that as a necessarily bad thing. There's this very persistent element, I don't want to say theme because the books are never quite in your face about this, but there's a very real element of accepting oneself in these books. And accepting oneself in a way that defies a lot of cliches when it comes to robot characters that become sentient. The Murderbot Diaries isn't about Murderbot's journey to becoming a human, it's tracing the path that it takes in becoming the being that it wants to be. The jury's still out as to what exactly this looks like, or whether it likes humans any better than it does now, but there is one thing that is certain. For as long as the sitcoms and the soap operas keep flowing, we can all rest easy knowing that humanity is safe from Murderbot's wrath. The same can't be said, though, for whatever evil corporation happens to get in its way. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, I really do appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. It's been quite a while since the last episode, and ironically, it seems like a bunch of people are starting to take interest in many of the prior uploads of the show. So, to all the new faces out there who, for whatever reason, subscribed even though my last upload was half a year ago, welcome and thank you. It's good to have you here. I know I'm one to overpromise as far as timetables for future episodes go, so I suppose there's nothing more to say except for I'll see you all next time. As always, the beautiful art that serves as the face of this podcast was made by my friend Alex Shamas, and you can find him on social medias and on his own website under the name Shammanist. And also, he just worked on a video game that released not too long ago called Tagline, so if you're into awesome retro movement-based shooters, then you should head on over to Steam and buy Tagline, because I've played it and it's great. But I suppose that's going to do it for me. I'll let you get back to it. I hope that wherever you are staying safe and that all of your dreams are coming true. Until next time.